is just sort of a supplementary video for 3200 for the lab. So all of the stuff that I'll talk about in this video will be covered in the lab, but I just wanted to post these just to give you supplementary material in case you missed a class or in case the lab was perhaps moving too fast for you. So this is for week 2 of the lab in Technical Communication 3200. And so in week 2 you should have covered sort of the basics of HTML, some of the basic rules of HTML, and you should have created your first valid HTML page. And so what I want to do is I just want to walk you through some of the basic principles and concepts that I want everyone to have a strong grasp of before moving on to later stages and more advanced types of HTML coding. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is what HTML is. So HTML is an acronym that literally stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Okay, so it's not a computer language, it's not computer code, it's not a programming language, it's a markup language. So essentially all that means is that HTML is a way to describe content. It's a way to mark up content. Okay, so we've all written content before. If you're in this class, you've written an essay in another class, I'm sure. If you're in college, you've written something, a college entrance essay or something like that. So you're all familiar with what it means to write content. Okay, so before I go in and describe exactly what HTML is, I want to sort of make the distinction between what HTML is and what it isn't. Okay, so in this class you'll learn HTML, which stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and you'll also learn something called CSS, which is an acronym that stands for Cascading Style Sheet. Okay, so these are two different languages. These are two different syntax and have two different sets of rules. Okay, so the first 5 weeks of lab and the first 5 weeks of this class, we're going to focus just on HTML. So what I want to do is I want to sort of distinguish what is HTML and what it is not. So what are the differences between HTML and CSS? So before we get into formally defining what HTML is, let's think about, or I'll give you sort of an illustration of how we create things in Microsoft Word. So what you see here is a Microsoft Word document. We've all used Microsoft Word before. We've all created documents in it. So one thing you might do in a Microsoft Word document is you might make a title. So title of your document. And what I usually do, and what I've observed many other people typically do, is they'll create the title of the document, but they'll also put some visual elements into it as well. So they'll bold the title of their document, maybe they'll center it, right? And then after that typically comes some paragraph content. So maybe they'll left align it then and remove the bold. So this is paragraph content. So when we create a document in Microsoft Word, we're creating the content, the actual words on the page, and we're doing design, bolding things and centering things and left aligning things almost simultaneously, right? So the act of doing those two things, writing the content and designing the content, occurs simultaneously in Microsoft Word. So the reason why I give this example to you is that you're very used to creating things in this schema or in this sort of process. And that actually isn't how we do things on the web. On the web, we do just the content, which is controlled by HTML, separate from the design, which is controlled from CSS. Okay, so HTML is just a markup of the content, of the written content, and doesn't do anything to the actual visual display of that content. CSS, on the other hand, is a separate markup language or style sheet language that allows you to make visual changes to the content. Okay, so I want you to be clear on that distinction. Okay, so another way that I like to sort of illustrate this is using an example from a website, right? And so this is a web page that sort of has everything that you would ever need on a web page. It's got colors and words and all sorts of things. So it's got both the content, the words and the pictures, but it also has the design, right? So you've got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 boxes across the top here, right? You've got like columns, a 2-column layout going on here. And so as you were shown in lab, we can actually use Mozilla Web Developer, which is an add-on for Mozilla Firefox. And just to show you quickly, if you missed lab or you aren't sure what I'm talking about, you can Google Mozilla Web Developer and click the first link that comes up. And if you just click Add to Firefox, you have to be using Firefox, by the way. But if you just click Add to Firefox, it'll add this toolbar here that you see on the top of your web browser. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to remove all of the cascading style sheet, right? So now what we're looking at here, what you're seeing on the screen, is just HTML, right? And so just HTML is just the content, the structural content of a website, right? So here's a list of links. Here's a header, for example. Here's some paragraph text. Here's some more links, and so on and so forth, right? So you can see that when we create an HTML document, this is just what we're creating. We're just creating the content. The content just goes on the page, and it's not designed in any meaningful way, okay? It just goes on the page in the order that you put it on the page, okay? So I want you to understand that while we're learning HTML and CSS, we're going to be stuck in this phase for about 3 or 4 weeks, right? Just creating HTML documents. Once we get to week 5 and we start to learn CSS, then we can start to say, okay, we want our header to look a certain way. And we want this to be 3 columns or 2 columns instead of 1 long column. And all of these other design decisions that we can make. So if we put CSS back on, we can see, okay, the content remains the same, but it looks a little different, right? Or it looks a lot different. We've got color, and we've got columns, and we've got boxes, and we've got all sorts of things going on, right? And so it's important for you to understand the fundamental differences between HTML and CSS. HTML is just the structure, just the content, and CSS, on the other hand, adds rules or styles or visual rules to that content, right? Okay. Another thing we covered in lab is how to create a valid HTML page. And one of the things that we did is the lab tutor should have explained to you that to create an HTML page, you don't need any special piece of software. All you need is a text editor. So what you're seeing here on my screen is what's called Text Wrangler. And this is a text editor for the Mac operating system. But if you're on a PC, you should have a piece of software called Notepad++. Okay? And so these are 2 pieces of software that are free and essentially are just text editors. And all a text editor is basically a blank white canvas. It's like a blank sheet of paper if you're thinking about creating something with pencil and pen. Okay, so that's all you'll ever need to create HTML documents. Okay, another thing that we covered or should have been covered in lab is the required elements or the required minimum elements of a website or a valid HTML web page. So I'm going to just quickly write these down for you. The first is what's called a doc type. The doc type simply just explains or describes to the web browser, which is the piece of software that opens up the HTML page. So Firefox is an example of a web browser, or Google Chrome is an example of a web browser, or Internet Explorer. Those are all examples of web browsers. And so for a web browser to be able to open up your HTML page properly, you have to tell it what kind of file it is. Okay? So you need to tell the web browser this is an HTML file. Okay? So that's what a doc type is. The second thing is a valid HTML tag. You need a body tag, a head tag, and a body tag. Okay? So these are the 4 elements you'll need for any valid website. Okay, so if you've got these 4 things on your website, then you've got a valid website. So let's talk about what these tags are. Okay, so HTML essentially is a markup language of different elements. Okay, and so all these elements they describe some kind of content, right? So if we said, here's some content, it's a header. All HTML does is it assigns a category or an element to describe the header. And so there's an element in HTML called H1, which stands for header 1. So we'll use that element. Okay, and so HTML is essentially a system of tags, and a tag is what you see here. It's this caret, and then it's the element H1, and then it's the closing caret. Okay, and so we wrap our content inside of an opening tag and a closing tag. So one of the main rules of HTML that you'll have to learn is that every tag that opens must close. So we've opened H1 here. We've got to close it here. Okay? So here's an example of some content, header, and an example of the markup. H1, which is an element, opens here and closes here. Okay? So that's sort of a formal definition of what an element in a tag is. It's not that important for you to memorize all of the hundreds of elements there are in HTML. That's what Google's for, right? You can look up these things. But a lot of them are just self-explanatory, right? So like there's a paragraph tag, right? And so you would obviously put paragraph text in a paragraph tag. And there's a list tag. So you'd obviously put list items in a list tag. But just, it's important for you to understand the concept of, okay, there are certain tags or elements in HTML that just all they do is they describe content. Okay, so going back to the 4 things that every web page must have, we must have a doc type, an HTML, a head, and a body. So I'm going to create a document that has all of these things. So to create a doc type, we use the caret, and then we use the exclamation point, and then we type in doc type. And we're using HTML5, and so that doc type is simply just HTML. Okay? So we've created a tag called doc type HTML. One of the main rules of HTML is that every tag that opens must close. So I'm going to close my HTML at the bottom. Okay? So this is our sort of encompassing tag. It encompasses everything inside of the HTML document. So inside of that is included several other tags, right? And the first thing that's typically included is what's called the head tag. And the head tag is simply a tag that stores metadata. Okay, it stores information about the website. Okay, so inside of the head tag, you can put things like a title tag, title of website. And I'll just show you an example of a title tag. If you go to any website, you'll see at the top of the web browser here and in the tab here is what appears inside of the title tag. UNT in-house, UNT in-house. Okay? So again, that's information about the page. It's not actually on the page. Okay. After the head tag typically comes what's called the body tag. And the body tag typically opens right after the head tag closes and closes right before the HTML tag closes. Okay. So anything that occurs inside this area, the body tag, is what you'll see in your viewing window of your HTML page. Okay. So that's important to know. So if we inside of our body, if we want to put a header, this is the header to my first website. This will appear in the body here, okay, of a website. Okay, so now this has all of the elements of a valid HTML page. Okay, it's got our doc type and our HTML tag. Those are combined into one thing. It's got our head tag, and it's got a body tag. Okay, and all the tags that open close. So our HTML tag opens here and closes here at the bottom. Our head tag opens here and closes here right before the body. And the body tag opens here and closes here. Okay, so if you followed along and you can do this, you've got a valid HTML website. Okay, there's not much information on here. It's not that interesting, but it's a fully valid website. So I'm going to save this. And anytime you're saving something, it has to have that .html extension, right? So just like you've got a Word document, in order for something to open in Microsoft Word, it has to have the .docx extension. In order for something to open up in a web browser like Firefox or Chrome, it's got to have a .html extension. Okay, so I'm going to save that to my desktop, and I'm just going to open it and show you guys what it looks like. So if I go to test.html, this is what it looks like in Google Chrome. Okay, and just to show you again, here's our title tag. We put title of website in our title tag, and here is the H1 tag where we had this is the header to my first website. Another little tip and trick is you can right-click on any website on the internet, and if you click View Page Source, you can actually see the code. And that's the code that we created in HTML. Okay? And if you look at these things sort of side by side, you can see how they correspond. So you can see we've got our title tag, title of website, and that's here at the top, title of website. And we've got our body tag, and inside of the body we've got H1. Okay, this is the header to my first website, and you can see that content here. This is the header to my first website. Okay, so that's hopefully what I wanted you to get out of week 2. Hopefully this is helpful for you if you sort of fell behind or if you just wanted more clarification.